Well, hello and welcome. It is day 8. I'm Ed Reiner. This is the daily dose of mind stuff, and we're on day 8. There we go. So getting the hang of the controls here. Still a little bit rusty. So we've gone through 7 days. We went through the whole paradigm shift series that Bob had done back in 2006. If you haven't watched that, go back and watch those episodes. And I would go back to those frequently. That really is a foundation of everything that Bob teaches and that I've been studying and I'm going to continue to study on a daily basis and have been studying. You can't go over this stuff too much. The repetition of this and these ideas start to sink in. You will watch, like I watched these videos back in 2006 and watching them now, this past week, I gained a whole lot more and caught things that I missed before. Even though I've watched those over and over, I've watched those so many times back in those 2006, 2007. So today, I'm going to go back even further. I found a video that was a TV interview that Bob did, I believe, in Canada a long time ago. I'm guessing that this probably is from the mid 80s, maybe after that, late 80s, early. No, it's got to be 80s. You'll see. But the information that he shares in this through this interview, the questions that are asked and how he answers those, he gives some great insight and drops a lot of wisdom and ideas that will really start to expand your awareness. So pay attention to this interview, get your pen and paper, jot this down. After this, moving forward, we'll go into more current stuff, but this was a really good one, I feel, that fits in with these last 7 that we've done, which is like a foundation. So we're building a foundation here. You can't have a structure built without the foundation. Otherwise, everything's going to crumble. So let's go ahead and pop over to the video, and I will see you after.
You attended seminars, and you said your reason there was to learn more about yourself.
Yeah.
My experience has been people attend seminars, especially self-development seminars, to look for the answer. They want to know, what is it out there I can learn so that I can be more successful? That wasn't your motivation?
No, oddly enough. And I think probably you're right. I think that's what most people are looking for. I think they're looking for an answer outside of themselves, and they're never going to find it. I think by this time I realized it was something in me. I met a man here in Toronto. He was one that originally got me involved in studying this, Ray Stanford. And he told me if I didn't like the results I was getting in my life, that I was going to have to change me because they were my results. And he said, if you're going to change you, you're going to have to find out something about yourself. And that seemed to make sense. I don't think it was an earth-shattering idea. It wouldn't give anybody a brain hernia, but it made a hell of a lot of sense to me. So I started to study myself. I found most people don't know who they are. They really don't.
What do you mean? I mean, I know my name, I know my age, I know where I live.
Yeah, that's not
what
you,
else
though.
is there?
That's just it. If you ask the average person who they are, they'll give you their name. They'll say, I'm Bob Proctor, but I'm not. Bob and Proctor are 2 words. My parents give them to me. They're called names, but it's not me. It's my name. Then somebody will say, well, this is me, but this isn't me either. It's my body. Like, you never phone down here to the studio and say, body won't be in today. It's sick.
Okay.
We don't say am hand or am leg. It's my hand, my leg, my body, my name. Who am I? Well, that's an interesting question. And I believe if a person will start to study that and look for the answer, they'll find it. See, I think we live simultaneously on 3 planes of understanding. We're spiritual creatures, we have an intellect, and we live in physical bodies.
Okay.
But because we lack awareness or understanding of who we are, we're totally locked into a physical world, and we let things outside of us control us. 95% of the population are reacting to life. They're not really living at all.
Okay. And would you call that one of the barriers to success?
Oh, there's no question about it. I think there's two barriers. Success is a funny word. Nightingale had a great definition for it. He said a person's successful if they know where they are and they know where they're going and they're progressively moving in that direction. He said that success was the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. Anyone that has a goal and they're moving towards it, they're successful. Most people think that you're successful if you have a lot of money. Quite often you have a lot of money if you're successful, but it isn't. I wouldn't say Mother Teresa has a lot of money.
Okay.
No, but she's a pretty successful lady. So it's
okay. So that barrier to success.
well, there's a couple of them.
Okay.
I think there's two barriers. One is our conditioning, the conditioning that takes place in our subconscious mind from the time we're infants. All we can do is act and talk like the people around us. That's why we learn the language we learned. If there was 10 languages spoken in our home, we'd learn 10 languages without any trouble. There's usually one, and that's the only one we ever learn. And we grow older and we think, oh, I couldn't learn another language. We could learn 100 if we wanted to. You can do anything. But I think we're conditioned. We have a real strong conditioning, usually with not some very good ideas. And then that's the barrier that's inside us. The one that's outside of us is our environment. We have a tendency to act like everybody around us. And if you think about this, it does make a lot of sense. Because if you study statistics, 95% of the people live their entire life and never live the way they want to live. Do you know that 95% of the population in this country, let's say in North America,
Okay.
the richest continent in the history of the world, they'll work productively, let's say for 40 of their 65 years,
Okay.
and they'll end up with hardly any money. Well, there's got to be something wrong.
So there's not much.
5% of the people end up financially comfortable or independent.
Are you trying to depress us, Bob? Because that's.
No, actually, I think it's quite an exciting idea, because you see, the idea behind it is that anybody can win, anyone at all. But if we start studying these statistics, I think we'll arrive at the conclusion, geez, I better start thinking for myself rather than follow everybody. Most people, they get a job, they look around, they see how everybody else is doing their work, and they start doing it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
They should stop and think, I wonder if any of these people know what they're doing. You know, is there a better way to do it?
But don't we have a need to fit in? I mean, we don't want to stand out. We don't want to get fired. We don't want to make waves.
Exactly. Just fall into line. You know, take a number. Be like everybody around. You know, that'd be great in the animal kingdom. But human beings aren't supposed to live that way. I think we should make a few waves. We should maybe stand out, be different. Not for the sake of being different,
Okay.
but because we are different. We all think different thoughts. And I believe we should start to think and build images in our mind of what we'd like to do and then set out and do it.
Okay.
Emerson did that. Edison did that. Marconi did that. Samuel Morse did that. Buckminster Fuller did that. We could go on and on and on.
Okay.
They were different. They stood out. They made a few waves.
Okay. You started with you saying you started with a search for yourself to try to find out more about yourself, and you were somewhat successful along the way.
Well, I didn't start it like that in the beginning. I started out at wanting a lot of money. I figured if I had enough money, I was going to cure all my problems. I found that wasn't true. I earned a fair amount of problems or money, and I seemed to have more problems. But I after working at this for a few years, I decided that the real answer is get to know yourself a little better.
Okay.
And I don't think you have to go off in the Himalayas and become a guru to.
Okay. What did you do to learn about yourself? You said you went around as many seminars.
I attended seminars.
Okay.
I went and listened to different speakers who taught something about the mind. I think the answer is in our mind if we'll start studying and trying to understand our mind.
Okay. Let me get back to you if I can. What did you learn about Bob Proctor during that study?
Well, I learned that the biggest part of me you'll never see. It's non-physical. And what you see here in the physical body is nothing but the physical manifestation of the higher side of my personality. And of course, that's true with you. And, Nancy's on the camera. It's true of everyone. And what we have to study, I think, is how does this non-physical part of my mind work? What happens when I think? Where do thoughts come from? How was this chair built? Somebody had to think. Thoughts are everywhere. And we pull thoughts into our mind and we build pictures or images in our mind.
Okay.
What we want to understand is that's a non-physical side of ourselves that's doing that. If I can build an image of something in my mind, I'm quite capable of building a physical replica of it in my world. So if I build an image of me as a happy, relaxed person, I can live like that. If I build an image of myself as being prosperous, I can become prosperous.
So if we think rich, we will be rich. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. We're already rich, just short of money.
Okay, those of us that like to acquire more money
Yeah.
and or happiness or whatever we see success, those of us that want to reach the goals that we've set for ourselves, we do it first by...
Well, the first thing you do is sit down and decide what you want. If it's money you want, how much money?
Lots of money.
Well, nobody knows how much lots is.
Okay.
So you've got to be specific.
Okay.
You write down on a card exactly what you want. And you carry that card around and read it often. Now, this is what I learned in this book, Think and Grow Rich, and it's what I teach in the seminars. I'll teach people how to set goals. But you decide exactly what you want, and then you start to think. Now, you're going to have thoughts come to your mind of why you can't get it.
Mm-hmm.
You have the ability in your conscious mind to reject that idea, kick it out of your mind. Thinking of why you can't do something is never going to do you any good. And keep thinking until you start to think of thoughts of how you can do it. And the way will be shown to you. It comes in the form of images in our mind. Think of how you can and not why you can't.
Okay. So our first step is to set
That's the
some
first
goals
step.
and think about how we can go about reaching those goals.
Exactly. And just think of how you can. Now, I'd say before you get into that, you should get a good book and start to study it. Select a person who is already doing something that you'd like to do. Get to know that person.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the experts for advice. Don't ask the person next door, your mother, father, brother, or the guy that works beside you, because they don't necessarily know. There's no point in asking a person how to earn a lot of money if they're only earning $10,000 a year. They don't know. If they knew, they'd probably be earning a lot. It's like, don't go to a sick doctor if you want to get healthy.
Okay.
So you find someone that you can go to for advice. Get a real good book and lock into that book and start to study it. Like, I've had this one that looks like a Bible, you know. But this is Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. I've been reading this thing now for 23 years. I'll probably read it for another 23 years. I get another good book that I brought over here today. It's called The Power of Your Subconscious Mind. Now, I'm not getting a commission for selling this. The author's dead now. He's been gone for a couple of years. But Dr. Joseph Murphy wrote this book, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind. And that's probably one of the best books that you're ever going to find, because you're going to learn something about your mind when you read this book.
Okay.
Now, I read a lot of books. I've got probably 1,000 books sitting in my den at home in my library. But the one that I carry it everywhere I go, and I read it all the time, is Think and Grow Rich. I never stop reading it.
Now, where's the value for you to reread that and read it again? I mean, you must know it well enough that...
I think I could probably recite it verbatim. But the secret is, I once read in a book where it said, when you read a good book through the second time, you don't see something in it that you didn't see before. You see something in yourself that wasn't there before. You see, when I read this, I create a greater awareness. Let me just read you one line out of here, 2 lines.
Okay.
Hill said, the missing link in all systems of education known to civilization today may be found in the failure of educational institutions to teach students how to organize and use knowledge after they acquire it. He went on to say that we should understand the real meaning of the word educate. It's not going to a brick and mortar edifice for 25 years. Okay. That's gathering information. You'll probably develop your memory, but I would question how well you develop your mind. And I'm not against education, because I encourage my children to go to school, as we know it. Now, he said the word education comes from the word educo. And he says it's derived from the Latin word educo, meaning to induce, to draw out, or to develop from within. An educated person is not necessarily one who has an abundance of general or specialized knowledge. An educated person is one who has so developed the faculties of their mind that they may acquire anything they want or its equivalent without violating the rights of others. An educated person is the one that knows how to go and get what they want out of life without being selfish.
In sense, a researcher, somebody who knows what they're looking for and knows how to go about finding.
Well, I think we should forever be involved in research, because learning is a lifelong process. You never stop learning. Education means to draw out from within. We're drawing on an infinite source. We've got deep reservoirs of talent and ability within us. We can learn to do anything. We have phenomenal powers. If we used our body like we used our mind, we'd probably just move our little finger.
Okay. We don't exercise our mind enough.
No, no. But we're not taught to. Kids in school should be taught before the school year ever starts to sit down. They should be given a blank report card and get them to visualize the marks they want to get and write their own report card. This is before school starts, first week in school. And then the teacher should say, now I want you just to concentrate on how to get that mark, and I don't want you to think of why you can't. And I want you to form the attitude that you're going to get it. Now, some people say that's not being realistic. That's being very realistic. That's following the success principles that go back 6,000 years in recorded history. That's how everything was accomplished.
It's not engaging in fantasy thinking, in
Hell
wishful
no.
thinking, in daydreaming
No.
we talk about.
No. Well, that's where all greatness comes from. Greatness comes from fantasy. I would imagine that when Edison first saw the light bulb, he was fantasizing. But he kept fantasizing, and he built it into a theory, and then he built it into an image, and then he built it into a fact.
Ah.
I mean, when I was a kid, it was a fantasy to think of going to the moon.
Mhm.
We've been up there with cars, playing golf.
Okay, you mentioned in terms of success principles, attitude, this business of attitude.
Attitude. It takes in the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you act. I'd have a difficult time really explaining attitude right just in a conversation. I use a board in the seminar, and I did an attitude seminar last night. We spent 3 hours dealing with that one subject, so to do it here in 3 minutes, I can do it. I haven't learned how yet.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
I recognize it's difficult because we
You have
talk.
to have a winning attitude, though, Tom.
Okay. In human relations, we talk about the toughest thing with managing people. The toughest thing to deal with is their attitude.
That's right.
That's almost
And
impossible.
that's the one
to
thing when
change another
management
person.
falls down.
But we can't change people's attitudes.
Well, nobody can change another person's attitude. And the only attitude we can change is our own. But you see, if management have the idea it's their attitude and we can't do anything about it, then they're not going to do anything about it. But if management arrive at the conclusion, yes, it is attitude, and let's teach the people something about attitude. Let's teach them something about themselves. Let's make them realize that they're worth something, that they're valuable, that the greatest resource we've got. Companies spend about 65% of every dollar that comes in goes back out on employees and wages and benefits, and yet management knows less about employees than anything else. They know more about the gadgets and the widgets than they do about the people.
Okay, so your suggestion is we develop a winning attitude.
Absolutely.
Can you define that for me, first of all? What is a winning attitude?
Well, if we can understand, let me digress for a second. The whole universe operates by laws, and there's a law of opposites. It's called the law of polarity. Everything has its opposite. There's a right and a left side.
Mm-hmm.
There's a front and a back, an up and a down, a hot and a cold, positive and negative, yin the yang. Well, you can think negative or you can think positive, but you can't think both at the same time. You're only going to think one way at one time. And we have to train our mind to think or look for the positive or the good in things. There's good in everything. There's no such thing as no good.
Car broke down on the way over to the station.
There's something good about it. There's something good about it. Now, you may have to look to find out what it is.
Okay.
But there's something good in everything. There has to be a positive and a negative for anything to exist. There's a law of gender that decrees that. Science understands it. It's taught in science.
Okay.
Well, once we understand that there's this law of opposites, there's negative thoughts or positive thoughts. As the thought energy flows into our mind, we decide what we're going to think. Person's out of work. They can decide to think, I can't find a job, but they can decide to think, I can. If they're thinking, I'm going to find one, then they'll start attracting a train of thought to them, figuring out how to find it. You really have to understand how your conscious and your subconscious mind works in relation to your body or your physical world to understand attitude. Attitude should be taught as a subject in school ahead of reading, writing, arithmetic, or anything else. Because it's a person's attitude that's going to determine the marks they get.
Okay, and maybe part of attitude or related to attitude is this business of self-image, which you talked about.
Yeah. Well, that would, like we were talking about success principles, and I was saying, you got to get the winning attitude, you've got to set a goal. Then you have to work on self-image. Now, when we think, we build images in our mind. Dr. Maxwell Maltz discovered the self-image concept as we know it today. In 1960, he was a plastic surgeon. And he realized he was operating on people. He may remove a nasty scar from their face. And he noticed sometimes when he removed the scar or maybe did a nose job on them or something, there was a great psychological change took place in the person. Where they may have been introverted, they started to become very gregarious and outgoing. And He postulated that there must be two images that we have, an exterior image, and we also have an inner self-image.
Mhm.
And he started to study this, and he wrote a magnificent book on it called Psycho-Cybernetics.
Mhm.
And psycho-cybernetics, psycho being the mind, cybernetics being the science of control and communication. And he goes into this, and he explains how every one of us has an image in our mind of ourself, and it's called a self-image. Too many people don't know much about themselves, and so they don't have a very good image of themselves. And you'll often notice that people will shy away from you. They won't look you in the eye. They'll look down or look up. They'll never try to do anything of any great consequence because they don't think they can. They have a poor self-image.
Okay. Part of that is because through school we're told about what we don't do well. We failed here, we had low grades, or
That
we
could be
only
part
got
of it.
60%
Yeah.
or whatever. Okay.
Yeah. I think there's been a great disservice done with the IQ test in that respect when you're bringing out school. Benet, the Frenchman, back around the turn of the century, invented the IQ test, and then we brought it over from Stanford over here, and we'll test a person's intellect, and then we'll brand them good, bad, smart, not, and that's not true. We can change IQs by changing self-images.
Mhm.
But yes, if we're told we're not very good, you're just like your dad, you're a bum, you're never going to do well, you didn't go to school, you can't win.
Okay.
Well, that's all that's all false. We can do anything, and we should be encouraging a child. Give them a pat in the back rather than a kick.
Okay. What can we do? Members of our viewing audience right now, most of us walk around with some degree of a self-image. Is that fair to say?
We all have a self-image.
Okay. Would you say most of us have a negative self-image to some degree?
Well, let's say we can all improve our self-image.
Okay.
I don't care how good your image is, you can improve it.
Okay. How can we improve it? Something specific. How can we go about making our self-image more positive?
Well, again, you're getting into a whole day seminar. If I could give you just a simple tip on it, if a person would sit down and let their body relax, totally relax,
Okay.
and then start to visualize in their mind, see themselves the way they want to see themselves.
Which may take a good deal of thought, since we're not.
Well, you
sure
relax, yeah. And
I mean, in terms of how we want to see ourselves. Maybe we don't know how we want to.
relate it to something specific.
Somebody we admire, maybe, or
Possibly.
somewhere we like to see ourselves down the road. Okay.
Yeah. See how you'd like to live your life. See yourself living it that way.
Okay.
Now, understand that that's a picture in your mind. When you pick up a book, the book is nothing but a picture that an author has painted in words. Van Gogh, the great artist, was asked one time how he did such beautiful work. He said, I dream my painting, and then I paint my dream. To get the picture in the mind, and then paint it on the wall or on the canvas. Well, if we would relax and build the image in our mind of how we'd like to see ourselves,
Mhm.
how we'd like to see ourselves acting in life, relating to other people, our social life, see ourselves in the position we hold, or how we make our sales presentations if we happen to be in selling or something, and then take that picture and describe it, write it out in the present tense. I am so happy now that I see myself, and write it out. Now, a lot of people will laugh at this and say, that doesn't make any sense. It makes a lot of sense. They can't tell you why it doesn't. I could spend hours telling you why it does, and I could explain it in such detail that everyone would understand it. But write out a description of how you'd like to see yourself. Start to read it, and read it, and read it, and read it every day. Carry it around and keep reading it. The one point that all the great teachers, all down through history, have all agreed on, they've been in complete unanimous agreement on it, we become what we think about. Now, it may be fantasy at first. It might even appear to us as being a lie. But if you read it often enough, you'll start to believe it. And when William James said, believe and your belief will create the fact, you will see the person's personality change. I watch people in the seminars, personality change right in front of my eyes. And all they're doing is starting to see themselves different. They're starting to think different thoughts.
So our thoughts control our actions?
Oh, there's no question about it. No, our thoughts control our feelings.
Okay.
Our feelings control our actions.
All right. And we control our thoughts?
Absolutely.
Or we can control our thoughts?
Control our thoughts, yes.
Generally, though, one of our difficulties, one of our problems maybe, is that we tend to react to what other people will tell us, and we consequently get the negative thoughts, and then that affects our feelings, and then that affects our behavior.
That's right. That's exactly the way it is. We read the newspaper. Doom and gloom's coming. We just accept it. Doom and gloom doesn't have to be coming. Do you know there's always been a depression for some people? I grew up with the idea that everybody went broke in the 30s. They didn't. Some made millions. I thought everybody went out of business. They didn't. Some people went into business. There's always a depression for some people, and there's always good times for others. Let's ask ourselves when we read something in the paper, do I want to get emotionally involved in that idea? If it's a negative idea, I don't want to get emotionally involved with it. I don't read the paper that often. I do, but I don't dwell on it.
You don't get emotionally involved in it when
No.
you see other.
When an idea comes into your mind, whether somebody else tells you or whether you read it in the paper, we should reason with it. Ask ourselves, will that idea help me get to where I want to go? If it won't, reject the idea.
Okay. All right. Bob, I appreciate it. Our half hour's gone by already.
All right. So I hope you got a lot out of that. That was a lot of information. I took quite a bit of notes on that. And I've seen it many times. But he goes into a lot of things. And I found something interesting in here that I'm going to touch on when I get to attitude. So let's just briefly go over what that whole thing, all the important points, I think, that Bob touched on. So the first part he was talking on was, who am I? You know, he said that he went to a lot of these seminars to find out who he was. And that's what most of us need to start to do, is to look at who we are. We are spiritual beings. Okay. We live in the physical body and we have an intellect. So we live on 3 planes of understanding. And that's where that image of the mind really comes in, because if we're a spiritual being and we have a mind, what does the mind look like? Most people think it's the brain. It's not. The mind is movement, and it's in every cell of our being. He talked about success. The guy asked him about, what is success? And he said that the best definition, he says that success is that we have to know where we are, know where we're going, and then progressively move in that direction. And that's what Earl Nightingale's definition of success was, that Bob adopted, was that success is the progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal. So as long as we have a goal that we're going for, we're a success. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You could be a teacher and your goal is to be the best teacher that you can be. And if you're constantly striving and moving and progressing towards that, you are success. So people often equate a lot of money with success. That's not success. You can be successful as long as you have something that you're going for and you're progressively moving towards that direction. If you're not moving towards it, you're going backwards, because there is no standing still. That goes on to a law of create or disintegrate. Everything's either growing or dying. So we want to be progressively moving towards that goal. And then when we're doing that, we can feel good about ourselves that we are a success, and we can celebrate those wins. If everything we did that day or today was moving me towards my goal, I'm a success. Then he talked about the 2 barriers of success. And he talked about inside. There's one that's inside and one that's outside. The inside barrier is our conditioning. Okay. We've been conditioned. Now, Bob didn't talk about paradigms at all during this interview. He may have come up with that later on. But the paradigms are our condition. It's the multitude of habits. It's how we've been conditioned from, and we're conditioned 2 ways. We're conditioned genetically and environmentally. And that was the second point that he brought up, was the outside, was our environment. So if you're hanging around a bunch of losers, you're most likely going to be a loser. If you're hanging around people that you want to be like, or doing the things that you want to do, then you're going to end up being that. Bob gives a story. He's used it a lot, about he used to hang out in bars, and he was constantly hanging out in bars. And he said one day he was in there looking at the people in the bars, and he looked around and thought, these guys are all bums. Then he started to think, well, if these guys are all bums and I'm always here, then I must be a bum. And that's when he put the glass down and he never went back. And to my knowledge, he's never had a drink since then. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was what I had heard, and it's probably pretty accurate. The next thing he went over was some steps. The interviewer asked, what are some steps that we can do? And the first step, Bob said, was number one is we need to decide what we want. Okay, we need to make a decision. Bob is always talking about decision, and decisions are so important. People don't make decisions. People haven't learned how to make decisions. In Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill writes a whole chapter on decision. And one of the things that Bob has suggested people to do, I've heard, and I've actually done this on a couple of different times. So here's the chapter on decision. I don't know if you can see that, but he suggests reading that whole chapter for 30 days, every day for 30 days. That will help, through that repetition, put that idea in that you can start making decisions. Because the first thing we need to do after we figure out what we want is decide that we're going to do it. And in here, Napoleon Hill writes, analysis of several hundred people who have accumulated fortunes well beyond the $1 million mark disclose the fact that every one of them had the habit of reaching decisions promptly and changing these decisions slowly if and when they were to be changed. People who fail to accumulate money, without exception, have the habit of reaching decisions, if at all, very slowly, and changing those decisions quickly and often. Decision is a super, super important habit to get into. You can get into the habit of making decisions, and nothing happens until a decision is made. And this is true. In my own life, one of the big ones that I can think of is when I used to smoke. I smoked for over 20 years, and I had tried quitting a whole bunch of time. People always try to quit smoking. I'm going to try. I'm going to start to cut down, and then I'll be able to stop. It doesn't work that way. Smoking is a very hard thing. It can be a hard thing to quit until you make the decision. And I had tried to quit for many years. And then one day I made a definite decision, not that, okay, on Monday I'm going to stop. I had had a cigarette and I thought to myself, you know what? I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore. And I made a decision that day, and I have not had a cigarette since. Now, that was only yesterday, but no, I'm just kidding. That's been years. It's been years since I've had a cigarette. And when I made that decision, I didn't have any urges that were super overpowering. I mean, sure, I had some, but once that decision was made, whenever someone else was smoking around me, it didn't bother me, because I'm like, I don't want that, because I already decided that I'm done. It wasn't like, oh man, I really wish I could have a cigarette. No, I was done. So decision is huge. We need to learn how to make decisions, and they need to be a committed decision. So we have to decide what we want. So in order to do that, we need to use our imagination. We need to fantasize and not think of why we can't do something. Just think of what we want. Once we figure out what we want, we need to decide what it is. Then, like Bob said, we need to be specific. Like the interviewer said, I want lots of money. And he said, nobody knows how much lots is. Some people say, I want more money. Well, you could be saying you want more money and be walking down the sidewalk, and there could be a penny or a dime. You just got your wish. And what happens, most people, is they step over it and keep going. And what they're doing is they're telling the universe, they're telling God that they don't want what God is providing. So we need to be specific. More money, I can give you $1. You've got more money. How much more? How much do you want? What do you want to do? What kind of business do you want? What kind of lifestyle do you want to live? Be very, very specific. And then the next thing he said was to write it down on a card. Write it down on a card. Write down what it is that you want. Write it on a card. Carry that card with you. and read it as much as you can. And when you read it, feel how it would feel if you already had that. I am so happy and grateful now that, and write it as what it is that you want. And then he said, keep thinking of how you can, not why you can't. That's very important. And anytime you start to get that idea of why you can't, you need to kick it out, say next, say, nope, I'm thinking of how I can. And the more we do that, we start to train our mind to start to look at the positive, and ways will start to come as how we can. And when we get those ideas, we need to then move on them right away. Another thing, then, the second thing that he had on there was find somebody who's doing what you want to do or has what you have, and start to see what they're doing. See if you can, now on social media, send them a message. Hey, I really admire this. How did you get where you were or are? What can I study? What kind of things do you do? And he said, get a good book and get into it. He mentioned, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind. There are so many books out there. Psycho-Cybernetics is another great book. U Squared, The Science of Getting Rich, Think and Grow Rich. There's so many different books out there. The Power of Awareness by Neville Goddard. There's so much stuff that you can get into. Get into a book and start to study it and really get into it. One of the things that since I started studying Bob, I hated to read when I was younger. I would read comic books. I was not a good student. But since I started studying Bob, I've continually reading. I'm always reading. Always. I've got a bunch of books that I haven't even got into yet that I can't wait to start reading. When you start to expand your mind, your awareness starts to expand. So he says most people, are just gathering information. We go to school, we're gathering information. That's why we want to find somebody that's an expert in what we do. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's starting to really pour outside. Gathering information is not going to do us any good unless we start to act on that information. It's the transference of information and experience that really starts to create results in our life. And then he says we have to train our mind to look for the good. We have to train it to look for the good in everything. And W. Clement Stone, well, Earl Nightingale did a audio. Earl Nightingale, who was one of Bob's mentors, and Bob worked with him for 5 or 6 years at the Nightingale Conant Corporation. It was Earl and Lloyd Conant who started the personal development industry as we know it today on recorded recorded medium. They used to do records. I'm getting a little off track there, but Earl did an audio, and he talks about W. Clement Stone, who was at the time probably the richest person in the world, or at least in the United States, as far as I know. And he had the habit of saying, that's good. Anything that happened, he'd say, that's good. And like Bob said, car broke down, that's good. Because he was training himself to look for the good. And as Bob said, that there's a law of polarity. There's a positive and a negative to everything. There's two sides to everything. I've mentioned this before. There's an up, there's a down. There's a hot, there's a cold. There's an in, there's an out. There's two sides to everything, two sides of the coin. What people do is they tend to look at the negative and focus on that so much. And what energy are they putting out is negative, and they're going to get more of that same into their life. So by saying that's good in every situation, we start to train ourselves to look for the good in everything. Now, we might not be able to find what that is right away, but if we're always looking for it, we will at some point. And it could be a while down the line. It could be years. And you look back and go, you know what? I see why that negative thing had to happen. I can see the good that came out of that. Now, in hindsight, I can see the steps that happened because of that. So if we know that there's good in everything, and we constantly are looking for the good, we're going to be putting that energy out, and we're going to be getting that back. He then talked about self-image and the importance of self-image, and how we all have a hidden self-image. And most of us, it's hidden. And if we want to take a look and see what kind of image that we have, it's really easy just to look at the results that you're getting in life, and that's going to indicate what kind of image you have. It's over on the bookshelf over there. As a Man Thinketh, James Allen, he writes, it's a quote, man is mind, and evermore he takes the tool of thought, and thinking what he wills brings forth 1,000 joys or 1,000 ills. He thinks in secret, and it comes to pass. Environment is but his looking glass. Saying that inner image is a reflection of our outer world. So if you're not happy with the results that you're getting, you need to look inside and try to see what kind of image that you're holding of yourself. And then Bob gave some instructions on how we can start to change that image. Pick a few people that you really admire, and they have qualities that you like. Now, you don't need to copy the person or try to be like them, but pick the qualities that they have, and then totally relax, close your eyes, and image yourself with those qualities. See yourself how you want to live. He talked about the IQ test, and how that's been a big disservice with children and people, because that labels somebody, and it tells them, or it's something that people then tell them, you're good, you're bad, you're stupid, whatever it may be, and that's the image that those people will tend to build. I had an image when I was young that I was not very smart. I didn't get good grades. I let that image affect who I was. And in turn, I wasn't a good student. I really struggled. But as Bob said, you can take your kids, and at the beginning of the school year, get a blank report card and write down what kind of grades you want. And then think, how can I get those grades? And focus on how I can get those grades. And you're focusing on the positive. There was a study that was done. I don't remember where it was, and I'll see if I can find it at some point. But they took a group of students. Let's say there's 20, and they split them up into two groups, 10 and 10. And they were all baseline around the same as far as education, knowledge, and students go. But what they did was they told the teachers that this group of 10, and they just randomly picked 10 people, are very, very high in their IQ, very smart, and they're going to really excel during the school year. And then the other 10, they had that those students kind of struggle a little bit, and they're not as smart, but they have some potential. But the other 10, you are going to really have fun with these guys. There was nothing different between all of them. Okay, at the end of the year, they found that the 10 that they had said to the teachers were super bright had excelled and far beyond the marks that they were expecting. And the other 10 were struggling. Some were having a real problem that they thought they were going to have to repeat certain things. It's because that notion was put into the teacher's mind, and they prejudged those kids. And instead of looking at all the kids saying that they all are the same, they all have the same potential, because we've all been gifted with an infinite amount of potential. But they put that image in the teachers' minds. Those teachers then conveyed that image to the children, which those children picked up the image thinking that they were good and that they were great because of the feedback that they were getting from the teachers, and they excelled. The other ones did not, because the teachers had that image that they're really not worth that much. We're going to focus on the ones that are worth something, which is absolutely ridiculous. But what it shows is that we all have potential, and that it's just a matter of creating that image in our mind. If the teachers were told all of those kids were exceptionally gifted, all those kids would have strived and done phenomenal. So we're going to end it here today. Tomorrow, and Bob talked about attitude in there, and tomorrow I'm going to find a video on attitude, because something that he said about attitude that I thought was really interesting, especially because you can watch this old video of Bob and then watch newer ones, and hear Bob even talk on stage, and how much more he got this information as he studied it. But the guy asked him about attitude, and he said he would have a hard time explaining it in just a couple of minutes because it's such a deep subject, and he could spend a whole day on it, and they spent a couple of hours on the one seminar. But when they were talking about that, his response was, I can do it, I just haven't learned how yet. And I think that's important because you can see everything that Bob is saying on focusing on the how, focusing on the good. Just with that answer, when he said that, you can see the mindset that the man had, where he wasn't aware of how to do it. He said, I can do it because we can do anything. I just haven't learned how. And that's, I think, an amazing thing we should put in our own mind when we're doing something, or teach our kids if they're trying to do something and they say, I can't. We need to tell them you can do it. You just haven't learned how. So that's it for today. I want to thank you guys for joining me. I will see you tomorrow, same time. Let me get some music to take us on out. And you guys have a great rest of the day. This is Ed Reiner. Please, if you got value out of this, share, like, comment, share it with everyone you can. I will be back tomorrow. This is day 8. We got 100 days we're going here. And you guys have a great rest of the day. Peace.